we go. Good morning and welcome to this public workshop on public transport and the research report that we had done. And just to give a wee bit of background, on the 5th of June this year, Council received the report on the viability of and demand for a public transport pilot for the township of Ashburton, which was a research report presented or prepared by Sarah Wiley and Sharon Gardner of Social Research and Evaluation. And this came about with ADC working in collaboration with the Safe Communities Steering Group and the coordinator, Leslie Symington, helped with getting the surveys out and about, and we now have the chance to have a presentation on the report. So we have Sarah Wiley here and Sharon Gardner, and we also have Mark Chamberlain, our roading manager, and we have Len Fleet from ECAN, who is the Senior Strategy Advisor for Public Transport. Behind him is Omid, who is a public transport planner for ECAN as well. So what we're going to do is just Sarah and Sharon will run through their report. We're going to take questions at the end, but we've got Len up the front here, so if there's any questions you'd like to ask him, he can jump in as well. So this has been live streamed, and hopefully there's a few people watching from home. So I will pass over to you, Sarah. Yep.
Thanks, Liz. Kia ora koutou. So I'm Sarah Wiley, and this is Sharon beside me. We'll tag team in making this presentation. So yeah, the research took place early this year, so probably a good 6 months ago since it was concluded. So we've refreshed our memories of what we heard and what we saw. The research questions that we were setting out to address, we're looking at what the likely level of demand would be in Ashburton for various public transport options, as far as we could estimate, looking at the number of potential users for public transport if it was available, looking at what was needed, what people in the community wanted in terms of public transport, how they thought they would use those options, how often, the time of day, when during the week, where they wanted to go, and where they wanted to be able to access transport from, and how willing they were to pay for those options. And looking at all those factors, then trying to hone in on what the best solution might be for Ashburton. In doing all of that, we were also trying to look at what the potential impacts might be for other transport providers, and essentially in Ashburton that is the local taxi service, and if there were going to be negative impacts on that business, how that could be mitigated. So that was the scope of the research. And we addressed that through a mixed methods approach, a rapid literature review, which Sharon undertook, looking at some of the research that's already taken place in this community over the last few years where public transport need, transport barriers and challenges have come through. Sharon looked at the evaluation of My Way in Timaru because we knew that there was a lot of interest in that service and how that might work in Ashburton. In terms of quantitative data analysis, obviously the 2023 census data was still not yet available down to the level we need. And I didn't spend a lot of time looking at the 2018 census data just because it's a bit crusty and old by now. But some review of that, access the total mobility data just to try and get a good lens on how many people are using total mobility, to access reduced cost taxis in this community, what we could find out about the patterns of use. Sharon interviewed 18 key informants, so they included people from ECAN itself, from council staff, the transport providers, all had an opportunity to be interviewed. So that was the different bus operators and the taxi company. And then people who worked with probably the most, the groups we already knew had high transport challenges. So services that are working with refugees and migrants, with older people, with people with disabilities, with young people. We really tried to capture their voice as much as we could to get their insights into the needs of the people that they work with and support. And alongside that, we had a workshop which had much wider invitation, where kind of addressed the same kinds of questions, but in a group setting. So that had 23 attendees. There was a wee bit of overlap. I think, looking through, I'd say there were 33 to 35 discrete individuals who either took part in an interview or in the workshop. Some people did have their say through both of those mechanisms. And the taxi company they had a couple of people who came along to the workshop. Then we had the community survey. So that had 450 responses. That went out in both electronic and hard copy version. We had 4 or 5 collection points around the town where people could drop off a completed hard copy questionnaire. And we had a lot of all those different services that I talked about before, putting it out to the people that they come in contact with. It was publicised in their newsletters. The electronic survey was promoted via the council's social media and Safer Mid Canterbury and a number of other agency social media channels. There was media coverage in the Ashburton Guardian and on local radio, so there was a pretty strong push around that. I snooped to see what the annual resident survey response was for the council, and that was 878 for this year. So 450 is pretty good going for a single issue survey. I know from looking at the findings that we heard from those people who were obviously more passionately for and against public transport, and I think it's natural to assume that people who are ambivalent to the topic are probably less likely to fill it in. I can't tell you what the response rate was because I don't know how many people saw the survey or the link and chose not to respond. But all I can say is that's a flipping good number of responses for a survey. And it was not over a long period of time either. There's just a picture there for the people hard at work at the workshop. It was a good cross section of people from lots of different areas of the community there. So just reiterating that I feel confident that we captured people's views pretty well in terms of transport. We definitely hit saturation with the qualitative data gathering. We definitely didn't hear anything new at the workshop to what Sharon had already gathered via interview. And in terms of the survey respondents, they were representative of Ashburton in terms of ethnicity, pretty much down to the percentage. Disability, prevalence of disability, what we know from the National Disability Survey, that's about 24, I think it's 24.5 or something % of New Zealanders identify as having a disability, and that was more or less exactly what we had captured in our respondent sample. It was representative in terms of where the population's distributed across the town, but it wasn't representative in terms of age. We had a significant under voice, if you like, of young people. The bulk of the people who responded to the survey were aged 40 and over. So we did capture a pretty strong voice from those in middle age. Definitely wasn't just older people who responded, but there was a lack of youth voice that came through there. So any findings in relation to young people, I think we need to treat with caution. I did quickly dip back in to look at the 2023 census data that is relevant for this, because there's a little bit that's released. Most of it isn't coming out until late October and into November, down to local authority and smaller area units. But the trend of increasing cultural diversity is obviously continuing, and now almost 1 person in 5 in the Ashburton district, this is district not town, doesn't identify as European. And in terms of the 65 plus population, nearly 1 in 5 of the people who live across the district are in that age group. And 8.9% age 75 and over. I'd guess that by the 2028 census, 1 in 10 people in Ashburton district might be identifying in that 75 years plus age group, unless there's a massive influx of younger people to the population. But it is very much an ageing population structure. This is across the district. It's probably more, the figures are probably higher in town for that trend of people tending to move from country to town as they get into those older years. I know that there was a question came through when the report was presented in June around older people living alone in Ashburton, and so I did pull that from the census data from the 2018 census. So there were 499 people in the town, aged 65 and over, who lived alone. So a fair number of them are not living in an aged care facility, because there's not that many places in those facilities. Total mobility data. So there's 641 people in Ashburton district who have a total mobility card that allows them to get that discounted taxi access. And you can see the number of trips and that sort of thing, which is a bit boring for these purposes. They do a survey every year. ECAN commissions a survey that looks at satisfaction with total mobility, and there is high satisfaction from the people that use that service in Ashburton. So looking to the survey findings now I need to get my notes to the correct page because I haven't been looking at them. So one of the questions that the survey asked was around the biggest transport challenges that people currently faced, and that was an open-ended question. So I've analysed that according to theme, and the biggest theme that did come through was around traffic volumes and congestion. A lot of people mentioning State Highway 1, so that trying to get across State Highway 1 and obviously the bridge. So that's a lot of different issues. That's, for some older people, it's them not feeling comfortable negotiating that area of the town in particular when they're driving. But it's also, to a much less extent, it's people raising it as an issue when they're cycling, and people also talking about it in relation to the time that it takes to get around the town when they're getting to and from work or for any other purpose. Parking issues came through, mostly from older people or people with disabilities, not being able to get a park close to where their destination is. Roadworks, a big theme, probably a theme that's reducing, because you did have heaps of roadworks and it feels like there's been a lot of that completed, so that may be a theme that comes and goes. Feedback around roading design, especially phasing of lights, seems to be a theme. Again, probably those people who maybe aren't as confident driving, and that just making it a little bit trickier again for them to get around by car or be willing to keep driving. Costs of running a car came through, costs of taxis came through, distances, walking, that probably came through more than that, than just looking at making walking hard. But a lot of people did mention the kind of the strung out nature of the retail areas in Ashburton. Obviously, if you want to go, you know, to particular retail destinations, they could be spanning a few kilometres, so not necessarily easy for people to get around all the different places that they want to in a trip. People mentioned, you know, the limited number of taxis and it being hard to get one at night, so, and that impacts on either drink driving or on choices to whether to go out or not. But yeah, particularly, you know, hard to get at night. And then a bigger, you know, not a huge theme, but bigger than some of those others I just mentioned, were you know, a number of people who don't drive or can't drive, who talked about the impact that it has on having to rely on other people or on taxis that, you know, because there's not many taxis, not being able to spontaneously make trips, having to rely on others, which probably makes people more reluctant to maybe go to something that they want to do for fun because they don't want to put their family or friends out by asking them to take them. So just that you know, the reliance and that kind of burden that comes with that. So the survey presented people not with an open end. It didn't just go, what would you want for public transport, because it would have just been, I think, an unwieldy thing to try and analyse, but also quite, to make it easy, gave them a number of choices to select from, of things that different types of transport, and got people to indicate whether they would never use them, whether they would use them once a month, through to 3 or more times a week as the highest frequency. And so that included a bus or a van that ran on a regular route with stops, kind of a traditional bus operation like you might see in the city, looking at different times of the day, so whether they would use that in the morning, in the afternoon, in the weekend, and then also a scenario of something like that in the Friday and Saturday nights for kind of particularly servicing hospitality, and that being able to have alcohol and safely get home without relying on other people. It included e-scooters, public e-bikes. It included some questions around specific things like more wheelchair taxis, more access to taxis, transport to school, because the response, that wasn't that useful in terms of what to do with it, because it's only relevant to a small portion of the people who responded to the survey. And it included a pool car kind of scenario where people could access a car self-drive as needed. But the most popular option that people selected was a bus or a van on a regular route, so a bus stop that would take them to various destinations. And it was just under a third of people thought that they would use that at least 1 or 2 times a week. So not, you know, really irregularly. Again, we have to be mindful that we can't just take that and apply it to the population of Ashburton and get a magic number. But if we applied it only to the people who've filled out the survey, then we've probably got 145, 150 people who are saying that they would use it 1 or 2 times a week. And I think because we didn't hear from young people in any great number at all, you can definitely multiply that a few times out. But I'm not a transport planner, and that's the tricky job that we get to leave to other people. But yeah, so that was the most popular option in terms of things that people thought they would use most regularly. There was quite a high proportion of people who thought they would use a bus or a van picking up at designated points to get to special events. The A&P, the examples that were given were the A&P show, Market Day, Waitangi celebrations, those special events. And whether or not this is taken forward, that's probably a commercial opportunity that it would be cool to promote to the organisers, because that's a pretty good response of appetite for that thing. And in the qualitative feedback in the survey, a number of people mentioned, that they aren't able to go to things like that because they can't negotiate the parking, or they'd have to walk too far. And it definitely would open up those big community celebrations to a wider pool of the community than are currently able to access them. That's kind of that. In terms of the purpose, why people wanted to use public transport, the biggest reason was for shopping. Second biggest reason, to socialise, catch up with friends, have a coffee. There was the heading of social versus friends is an abbreviation for what it was, but it was that kind of catching up with people for whatever reason. And getting to health appointments, the third most popular reason, and then safe drinking, the fourth. And I think that probably aligns a lot with those people who identified wanting to be able to catch a bus home on a Friday or Saturday night. Looking at for people with disabilities, the top three reasons didn't change. And young people, the most common reason was wanting to get to school, but like I said, I don't think the respondent group is large enough to be confident about that. In feedback from parents, a number of them wanted their kids to be able to catch a bus to sports training and that kind of thing after school. But yeah, we didn't get the youth voice captured around that. The survey asked people what difference would it make to the quality of your life if the transport options you selected were available. Overall, out of 5 stars, people went for right on the average of 3 stars, so a moderate difference overall. Bearing in mind that, some of the people who've completed this were passionately against public transport. That should, I think 3 is pretty solid actually. But it varied a lot between different groups. So for refugees, 4.3 out of 5, so a pretty significant difference that people felt that it would make. 4 out of 5 for new migrants. And then similar trends for different ethnic groups. So for Middle Eastern, Latin American, African, 4.1, Asian, 4.1, Pacifica, 3.7, Māori, 3.5, so slightly above what we were hearing over average. And then looking at disability, I didn't just ask, do you have a disability, but I did drill into the different types of disabilities following the format of that Stats New Zealand would use in their disability surveys. And for people with disabilities overall, still not a massive difference, 3.5, so that's influenced obviously by total mobility access for some people, and that high satisfaction that we saw from that data. But for people with a learning disability, 4 out of 5, and people with psychological disability, 4.2 out of 5. So our second highest group in terms of indicating the difference it would make. And I would suspect that a lot of those people with those sort of disabilities don't have total mobility cards, either because they don't know to ask for it or their GP hasn't maybe thought about it. A lot of the people in that group will be on supported living, they'll be on living on lower income. Potentially they might have a driver's license, but they don't have access to a vehicle. Lots of stuff at play around that, but significant transport, limitations. Also not necessarily limited only to using a bus, because they're not necessarily physically unable to get around. Thinking more broadly around those more active transport options that might come into play in public transport, it becomes relevant to that group. Looking at the costs, so what people expected to pay, they were mostly talking in that $4.50, $5 kind of range per trip. So more than what you'd pay if you were catching a bus in Christchurch. But it did range quite widely, with a few people wanting free stuff, a very small percentage, and then some people being quite happy to pay quite high amounts. But that's, most of the different options, they've sort of come, because I've gone through and averaged every single amount that people have given. They are in that sort of $4.50 to $5 kind of range, with a willingness to pay more for something at night, which is probably a different kind of transport user maybe. So just pulling together what the survey told us, it did show moderate level of demand for public transport, with that slight preference for regular timetabled service. Looking at where they wanted to go, we looked at all the different places that people would want to get to and where they would want to be picked up from. It looked like something that goes around a circuit would fit the needs. Otherwise, you'd end up with so many buses running empty in all different directions, when actually people take a longer time on the trip. And something goes around a circuit, you could get to the hospital, the college, the sports facility, all that different retail area, and obviously it needs to get out to the outer reaches of Tynwald and in each of the other directions around the town. But yeah, that was the slightly preferred option. Again, there was appetite for e-scooters too, and there, none of the different options that were presented for consideration, fell flat, but they were the preferred options. What I could see looking at the survey findings is that I don't expect that the taxi service is going to suffer for any public transport option. The total mobility users really like the service that they get for that, and older people. Oh, what I didn't say in all my different breakdowns. So for older people 80 plus, the difference it would make for them was 3.2, so only slightly above average. It's not older people that are keen on public transport. They're quite happy. They like the taxi. They like the door-to-door kind of service. Sharon will go into this more, but it was that young people, people who are working, people who aren't working for a variety of reasons, and those people with disabilities that are maybe what you'd think of as more hidden disabilities. But I will pass to Sharon to continue, and I'll be the clicker here. I'll switch. You go there. Oh, then
Okay, kia ora everyone. So today I'll be talking about the interview findings. Thanks, Sarah. So just to give you an idea about who all were interviewed, there were 3 groups of people. There were 10 key people from organizations in the community. Then I also interviewed 5 people from Ashburton District Council and Environment Canterbury, and 3 transport providers who were a representative from Beckley's Coachline, from Pearson's Coachline, and also from Ritchie's. So first I'm going to cover really what the community providers have said about people in the community, and I'm also going to just break that down into 4 main groups of people who are the the elderly, young people, refugee migrants, and people with mental health issues and other disabilities. So, what are young people saying? And here are some of the gaps and the needs in the community. So there's people who are not eligible to travel to school by bus. So there's an eligibility zone that is zoned out by schools, and those who are beyond that zone only can access the school bus. But young people within the township are still finding it hard to get to school, and they're relying on parents and on friends to give them rides. A lot of people said that it would cost a lot to own a vehicle for young people and to pay registrations, and some of them enroll to do a driver's license, but they don't complete it, and so they're driving around with a learner's license still, and so there's an issue of safety as well. Then they also brought up that they really need to get to work and there's a risk of unemployment if they don't. And finally, they really need to engage in services in the township, and they aren't able to do that at the moment. The next group of people are people with disabilities and mental health issues. Again, as Sarah was pointing out, there are a lot of people who are not eligible for that total mobility card. And for them, the taxi rides are really expensive, especially because they also have additional costs with having a disability, and so they don't have that extra income to pay for a taxi ride. What came up really strongly in these interviews was they do require another wheelchair service with a trained driver who knows how to lock down a wheelchair into the car, and it's properly and it's done really well, so that the wheelchair doesn't bounce around in the car. And then there was the issue of isolation, which is exacerbated, and especially with people with mental health issues who isolation sort of makes the mental health issue much worse, and so they can't really get to town, and so transport would really help them to overcome that. One thing that came up from health providers and social workers was they were actually being the transport providers for people in this cohort, and this was not sustainable for them. They were giving up hours of being social workers by just transporting people around. But they really recognized that it was very important for these people to get to health appointments and get to places. So here's a quote from the interview. It's ongoing, but people really need it, and it's taking up health service time. The next group of people are the elderly, so their needs were again similar. Those who don't qualify for total mobility cards were finding taxi rides expensive, especially the taxi rides from the township to Tinwald. They were finding that expensive, and they do require a door-to-door service, and they also are like that additional support of people helping them with their bags and their shopping, etc., whilst coming out. There are a couple of courtesy vans here that do cater specifically to the elderly, but they don't cater to, so they take them to like day programs, or they take them to, there is a courtesy driving service that Age Concern offers, but they're running short of volunteers, and they also need a vehicle to be available. So they need the elderly person's vehicle to be available, and so that just doesn't work for some older people, and they can't access specific things like go to their doctor's appointments and go to supermarkets, etc. So they're not catering to those needs. And finally, the refugee and migrant community. I spoke to the person who trains refugee and migrants in driving, and she said to be aware that it takes between 6 months to 2 years for them to actually obtain a driver's license. And so they're just left in limbo in this time, and they don't know how to look after themselves. Again, they're reliant on volunteers to take them around, and it's not very sustainable. And also another factor that came up was they need to connect with other families who are migrants and refugees in order to feel for their well-being. So one quote that was particular here was that if just the women had the access to public transport, the whole family would benefit of that in the family's life. So I won't go into detail again on the key locations that were identified by all of these different groups that were important, but it sort of it just reiterates what Sarah was saying earlier, that they really need to get to their health appointments, to supermarkets and other shops, to the library, and to socialize and to meet with other people. Some of the other things that came up were young people getting to school and to work, and refugees and migrants getting to work, and then also getting to the gym and the community pool, and as well as other social services that were in the township. Now, some key locations that were identified in the table to the right, that's coming to the town center, Tinwald, Netherby, Hampstead, and Allenton. They also wanted transport to areas outside the township, but I know it was not within the scope of this study. But there's a need as well to be transported to areas outside the township. So what were some of the solutions that they said would work for them? For young people, it was e-scooters and e-bikes. They said that they're really tech savvy and they know how to operate this. It would be really convenient for them to get around, especially for areas where the bus stops. They could access areas beyond bus stops and they could get to places there. They came up with a mini bus as well with a predetermined route, and this was an open-ended question. I didn't give them specifics as Sarah did in the survey, but the kind of responses that came up were very similar. So what they really wanted was that it should be affordable and that the trial should run for a significant length of time. It was important that it shouldn't run for a short time where there was uncertainty of whether they should switch to a new way of being transported, and then they'll have to go back to relying on family and friends. So they wanted it for a significant length of time. A similar solution came up for people with disabilities and mental health issues. There was a minibus which was regular and reliable, but they had specific considerations that they had to look at, which was really how accessible are these in terms of even the bus stops, in terms of how will the car manage to have wheelchairs. They were quite concerned about technology, and if it was a technology reliant service, then they might not use it. So looking at other ways to connect to people. Some people in this cohort did require a door-to-door service, and some people said that if they might require a support person to go with them on the first couple of trips, and then they would be more independent over time. And they would prefer to have cash payments than something that it was paid online or with a pay wave. So yeah, similar issues. And again, they said that the trial should include really good advertising and flyers around the service for them to understand what it offered. Then the elderly also thought a minibus would be a good solution for them. They also had specific considerations that's similar to those with disabilities. They did like to have a door-to-door service, and they also spoke about the gold card because users in Christchurch have. I think they have a free ride within certain hours. Gold card users. So would that be how would you'll have to think about that and work around that. They did really, they've heard a lot about MyWay in Timaru, and they've seen how successful it is, and they would like to have a service like that scaled back to Ashburton. Similar results again for refugee and migrants. Just to be aware that English is their second language, so so bus drivers need to be aware of that, and in terms of the timetables and how the messages are being sent out to them, you just got to be cognizant of that. So those were all the community providers. We now look at what people from the Ashburton District Council, some of the councillors who have interviewed from here, as well as Environment Canterbury representatives, and what did they say. So before we get into solutions, they really had some considerations that we had to look at very much. Yeah, so cost was a big one. So the My Way service in Timaru costs, it's subsidized by grants from Waka Kotahi, and it's also subsidized heavily by ratepayers. So there has to be a significant initial investment, and then there were constant operational costs that went with a service like My Way. And so the whole community needed to be on board if they wanted a service like My Way, because it would it would mean that the rates would increase. They also spoke about demand. So for a trial to be worthwhile, there had to be a good demand, a high demand for the service. And just to be aware that it took 12 months to 2 years for behavior to change in Timaru and for demand to increase. And there was a significant increase in demand in Timaru for the My Way service, but it took time. So there might be peaks and troughs in demand, and that would be natural. And to be also aware about the size of the population, that Ashburton is a growing district, and so there would be higher demand over time. Again, with availability, we have to consider how regular it is, what would be manageable. They thought a minimum of 2 services would be manageable, and with a wait time of about 15 to 20 minutes. And finally, what some other things they thought about was what about the signage on the streets. You've got to think about makeshift bus stops. Where can people wait? How are they going to pay for it? Is there going to be a travel card, or will they pay by cash? And they said that technology was really important, and it's vital for people to connect and to get updates on where the bus is or how long will it be for the bus to reach us. But it also is a barrier for many people. And so looking at other ways of booking and how can they do you have a call service center where people can call and book, and how is it advertised? And finally, looking at staff, how are you going to staff the service? And also the type of vehicle had to meet government guidelines for public transport. So it had to have a low floor to have wheelchair accessibility. So what were some of the possible solutions they came up with? The first was the Community Vehicle Trust. So this is run by volunteers, and it's not really expensive to operate. There's an annual grant of $10,000 that is given by Environment Canterbury to help with the running and operational costs of, I can see Liz knows all about this. Yeah, and then there's also this really nice social and community element around a community vehicle trust where they care for older people and they care for the refugees. So the booking is the same as in a taxi service. You call and you book and then there have been really successful trials in Geraldine and in Waimate, where they found that it was very user-friendly, and the community felt it really suited them because it was a smaller town. And they run in quite different ways in Geraldine and in Waimate, and so just having to consider to tailor-made make the way the community vehicle trust is run in Ashburton. The cost is about $5 to $7 per trip, which is local, and and representatives of Ashburton District Council and ECAN said that they would require around 4 vehicles to service Ashburton. That's what they thought, and they also thought that you just have to factor in additional costs of like insurance of the vehicles, fuel, warrant of fitness, etc. Another point that came up here was with volunteers. So this whole service is run by volunteers, and currently somebody said that there was a volunteer shortage in Ashburton. So just having to think, maybe you could have a part-time worker, somebody who works part-time to take bookings, and yeah, that could be one solution. The next solution they thought of was a minibus or a MyWay system, but again, just being aware that MyWay costs a lot to ratepayers, and so especially an on-demand service has a really high cost. But just having a regular service which was timetabled would work. But we had to think about bus shelters and bus stops, etc. So just what's happening in Selwyn District Council is it's so they've split up between the cost between ECAN and Selwyn District Council. So the district council is responsible for the signage on the roads and for maintenance, whilst ECAN is responsible for managing the bus. So that's how they split it up. Another good example is a shopper's bus that runs in Rangiora. This is just $2, and you've got to pre-book it the previous day. And this is another way, they advertise it as a good way to connect with the community. So e-bikes and e-scooters was another solution they came up with. These have been really successful in Rolleston and in Rangiora. So the Selwyn District Council got the e-scooter company called Lava, and they had 50 e-scooters in Rolleston, Lincoln, and Trebleton in a 2019 trial, and currently in 2020 it went up to 220 e-scooters. So this was really popular there. There was significant number of rides. There were about 3,800 rides per month. And something funny though, people are worried about safety with e-scooters, but they reported no injuries there. So there were no injuries. And so a good thing with e-bikes and e-scooters is they are operated by those companies themselves. All the questions and complaints go to the e-scooter company, and so the council really doesn't have to worry about it too much. There's no cost to the council. However, some things to be aware of are that scooters are allowed on footpaths, on the shared paths, on the road, and on cycleways. So just having to introduce that to the entire community, and to determine where the boundaries are, where can scooters go up till, and beyond which. I think I think Selwyn District Council, or even I think Waimakariri District Council had a training day for e-scooters. So you could come try an e-scooter for fun, for free, on one day, see how it runs, and then slowly, and build an appetite for e-scooters. So there were other solutions as well that do not have to be led by the council, and this could be a health bus funded by the Christchurch District Health Board. It could be grocery deliveries, Uber Eats, or rest homes could provide transport. So there's lots of different options that are available. Finally, and the last group of people I interviewed were the transport providers. These were Beckley's coach lines and Pearson's coach lines. And Ritchie's has bought Pearson, so I also spoke to a representative from Ritchie's. And Ashburton Taxis, I couldn't get hold of them, but they did come for the what was it? The Hui, yeah. So they just said they had also similar considerations, but really from a provider perspective, that there should be, whilst you're balancing how affordable it is with customers, there should also be a return for the service. And you've got to factor in, are you going to have discounts for the elderly and for students? You've got to make sure that the routes are very clear and there's very easy to read timetables. Um, um, if you have a 7-day service, then it would cost a lot more. So, really considering, should it be a Monday to Friday service or for the whole week? And again, looking at all these specifications which were brought up earlier as well, it has to have wheelchair access, handrails. They did say that you should consider having a backup vehicle in case it breaks down. And also, it would be wise to source vehicles locally instead of having to buy new vehicles. And consideration of employment during the trial. So if it's a 6-month trial, what are you going to do with someone who you employ as a bus driver? Is it going to be 6 months? And so is it going to impact on services? Especially there was going to be no impact on bus services. So they really operated to specific groups of people. Beckley's Coach Line runs a day service for elderly people where they do day trips. So there would really be no impact on them. Pearson's operates the school bus run. So really they don't see a trial impacting them because they've got a contract, but they were worried about Ashburton taxis and the impact on them. But so just restating again that there's a high level of satisfaction with Ashburton taxis. Most people. So here's really two good quotes. The one on the left just says, like, we don't want the public transport system to impact Ashburton taxis because they're doing a brilliant job. But on the right, the community provider said there still is a gap that needs to be to be filled, and so really looking and balancing that. Thanks. I'll pass back to you, Sarah.
Yeah, sorry, I'll jump back. Just to add to what we've been talking about and recap really. A lot of the need that we heard about when Ashburton has its new bridge, some of those challenges are probably going to be a wee bit mitigated with that addition and the impacts that it will have on traffic flow through the town. And the other thing that I think it's important to think about is that a lot of the people who are facing transport challenges are probably physically able to get around by bike. So anything that's encouraging people to cycle is also part of the equation of meeting transport need. There was a response to a survey from a young person, and they said that they walk everywhere at the moment, and it takes 40 minutes to walk from home to their work. And when they get called in because someone's sick, unless they get plenty of notice, they can't take up the shift because 40 minutes is too long to get there. But why doesn't that person have a bike, and why aren't they biking when they're probably physically able to do so in a lovely flat town that should be really cycle friendly? About 14% of the people who filled in the survey said that cycling was one of the regular ways that they get to where they need to be, which is about exactly the same percentage that came through in the cycling and walking survey from 2020 here that the council undertook. So if it's, whatever you do around public transport, really trying to support people to be able to access a bike and to feel confident to get around the town by bike is also going to address this need. It's not, I don't think you can look at public transport in isolation, especially thinking about those refugee and migrant groups and thinking about those people with those hidden disabilities or income constraints that make it hard for them to get around by car. Anyway, questions?
Thank you very much. That was really interesting. I've written lots of notes. But I mean, we'd had the report, so it was good to get that overview as well. And probably the thing that I've got most of it is that there shouldn't be much of an impact on Ashburton taxis, which is what we had kind of heard before. And with the Community Vehicle Trust, we obviously operate our car, which comes from out of town into Ashburton on demand, and we hadn't run a service within town because we didn't want to impact the taxis, but maybe it's time to rethink that. Anyway, lots of questions. Phil, you're first.
Thank you. Was it right that Ashburton taxis were part of the HUI, but they didn't give feedback?
So they fed back through that workshop setting. I can't remember Sharon.
Right button.
Yeah.
No, it's got a flat badge.
It's, so I made multiple attempts to contact them, and every time the main person at Ashburton Taxis, I can't remember his name, Graham, I think, he said he was busy, that he had other things going on, and it was, I mean, we had to get the report underway as well. So we took what we heard from them from the HUI, and we added that in. Yeah.
Okay. It seems unbelievable that they didn't provide feedback with this, but anyway. Uber, apart from mention of Uber Eats briefly, that wasn't mentioned at all. Was that that wasn't a part of your survey? And if not, why not?
Uber Eats?
No, Uber.
Uber.
So it wasn't an option that we included in the survey, but there was space for other anyway, and it didn't really come through. And we also didn't hear about it much as an option through the interviews or the workshops. And I don't it seems like an obvious additional solution, especially for those people who are wanting to get around in the evening where they just can't get a taxi even if they want it because there's not enough operating. So yeah, it wasn't a specific item that was included in the survey, but there was still scope for people to highlight it. And for whatever reason, they didn't. But also, when you're talking when you're saying public transport, I think people have a certain mindset of what that is, and they may not necessarily have connected Uber as something that was public transport.
And I also think that so many people had an issue with cost for taxis, so it might be an issue again for Uber as well, that it won't reach everybody. Even if you do have a service like Uber, it might not reach people who cannot afford it.
It's generally cheaper than a taxi, and the overall was only 13% who was an issue. It wasn't a cost of taxi, so that wasn't a massive number. Yeah, okay, thanks.
Thanks, Phil. Yeah, my question was about Uber too, because I thought that would come up as well. Lynette.
And just ask you, when you did your survey, did you survey at all the service clubs like Lions and Rotary and that, because they're heavily involved at the moment, taking people to daycare in the 206 and that, and they take people to appointments, whether it's Ashburton or Christchurch. There's a lot of service clubs doing a lot of work in this space, and I'm thinking, why weren't they part of a survey? And will if we do get a bus service, are these people going to step away from that, and we're going to have a lot of people high and dry because they're not going to get to these services, because a lot of these people struggle now even getting into a vehicle and that.
The service clubs weren't included as particular stakeholder groups to be interviewed. I've also had I've often tried to engage with them, but what also happens is that you can't necessarily get to the person who maybe connects with that topic area just by contacting the secretary of a service club. Except I'll be 100% sure that some of our respondents will belong to Rotary Lions here, just for the fact that that we had a strong engagement through the survey. I'd have to go back and look if anyone's specifically mentioned them, but I know I know Ashburton, and people are often engaged with multiple organisations, and there'll be people in aged concern who definitely are also members of the local Rotary Club. So we've got the crossover, but we didn't specifically ask for somebody from Rotary or Lions. Or, you've got a few
All the
others
other
here
service
too.
clubs,
Yeah.
A bit disappointed about that. You talk about ECAN and they're going to be rates coming from them. So with ECAN, the rates coming from them, are they rating the whole town here in Ashburton, or is it the whole district wide that's going into the services now in Christchurch and in Timaru?
What you're talking about here, obviously, is some sort of subsidised service.
Yes.
Whatever we're looking at, all the use cases seem to be pointing to some level of subsidy. If it's a subsidised service under the current legislation, ECAN would have to contract that. ECAN would obviously then have to rate to pay for whatever that service is, whether it be a single bus in the morning or multiple buses during the day or a My Way service. ECAN will have to generate rate money to pay for that. Our current model, if you like, is to rate only that area that is positively impacted. So when we're looking at Christchurch, for instance, or it's only Christchurch City, it's not Banks Peninsula, don't get rated, and parts of out around behind the airport and all that, they don't get rated for it because they're so far away from a bus stop that they won't get rated. It's similar in Waimakariri District and Selwyn District. They have a urban rate and a rural rate, and the rural rate's like it's $29 per property per year for a rural rate in Waimak District, for example, and that acknowledges that people can come into Rangiora, for example, and catch a bus from Rangiora into town, or their children can to do that. It sort of acknowledges the park and ride thing. So we would definitely have to be rating in Ashburton if it was a subsidised service, we'd have to operate it, and that would under the current model, that would be in Ashburton Township. It wouldn't necessarily be the rest of what I'll call the old county.
Yeah, because at the moment, the county is rated for the ones that are operating out of Rakaia, and that's that service. So you'll have to,
because that's specific.
Rates,
that's specific to getting people from outside the borough into the borough. To do their shopping and things like that. The people from Meth and the people from around that Hines and things
so
like that.
there could be a rate from ECAN on town here, plus council rates to fund this. So our rates will probably go up another few percent from each ECAN and council.
And the issue that we have to highlight is too that the impact on Ashburton taxis. You have it. In some ways, you're blessed in Ashburton in that you have a taxi service here now. You don't want to negatively impact on that, and in fact, the way the legislation and the rules around provision of PT are geared, it's to try and protect those or existing commercial interests, and in some ways, you don't want to run a service that undercuts that.
That's kind of where I was coming from too. Thank you.
Tony.
Thank you. Thanks, guys, for the survey. It's quite extensive and does answer some questions, but not all. Those you just mentioned, those with disabilities or mental issues that don't or aren't aware or don't have quality access to the service. At the last TM meeting, I did bring that up, and we need to make the medical service in town aware that those services are available. Whether that's where the breakdown is, I'm not too sure.
Yeah, I don't know the background to that, but yeah, that's really awesome that you're doing that, because I think probably it is like GPs are really busy, and I think sometimes they might not even, it's easy to notice somebody who's lost their license, who's had their license, or those older people losing their license. It'd be on their radar, and it's probably well on their radar if somebody has a physical disability, but maybe not something that a busy GP thinks of for somebody who's not struggling to get around because they're not experiencing mental well-being. Yeah. So good on you. Great.
Okay, cool. You referenced the service groups maybe becoming drivers. I think a lot of the service groups are challenged with members, to be fair. I'm involved in one, and we're all getting older, and we're not attracting new younger members. So long term, I'd probably be in favour of paid drivers because of the reason that they're always going to be there, and it could be difficult. You referenced the biking. It's not cool for some young people to bike, so that could be the challenge for the young fella who walks 40 minutes. He could be there in two minutes if he had a bike, but he doesn't probably. It's not cool to. Does ECAN know? Do you know obviously it all comes down to cost anyway, and you say that the average person may be wanting to happy to pay maybe $4.50 or thereabouts for a trip, but the actual cost to the ratepayer, what you've set up in Timaru, you must know what that cost is. So that is it, 100,000, 200,000, or whatever.
Timaru, I was looking at our long-term plan rating things, and it's $33 per 100,000 worth of capital value for each property in Timaru, and you're looking at, Timaru is obviously a size bigger than Ashburton, so there's more rateable properties there. So you currently in Ashburton you're rated, I think, $1.35 per year for just per property, just to run the total mobility service. So you're looking at potentially quite an increase in terms of rates to provide a service. And even before we get there, there's process issues about how you engage also with Waka Kotahi and central government, because that $33 in Timaru is also match funded by funding from central government to pay for the MyWay service. So you get a roughly 49% of the subsidy is subsidised by Environment Canterbury, 51% is paid for by central government. At the moment, there's no service in Ashburton, so but you'd have to engage with NZTA and central government to ensure that you got that match funding. Current signals from central government in terms of public transport are not encouraging. So the potential is there that you may have to fund. If you were going to go it and do it and go alone, you might be funding again. You might be doubling the expectation on the rates amount.
Neil?
Yeah, thanks for that. So just clarifying, NZTA subsidise the Rangiora Christchurch buses at the moment.
Correct. Yep.
Yep.
Rangiora, Christchurch, Timaru, they're 51% subsidised. You take away the value of that you get from the fares, and whatever's left over to pay for that is paid for 49% from rates, 51% from central government grant.
That's good clarification. Just thinking of the mobility, you mentioned the buses or whatever you had would probably need to be mobility capable, as in high to get wheelchairs and what have you. And if you kept the total mobility service, which we have now, which is the taxis, then would you need to have a higher value bus equipped with total mobility capable features because it's already catered for by the taxis? Because you could get a bus that just does people who don't need mobility because the service is catered for by the taxis, which may keep the cost down.
Unfortunately, the way, if it's a subsidised service, then it comes under the rules that basically say that, you know, government says that if you're funding this, it's got to be wheelchair accessible. You've got to use a wheelchair accessible vehicle. You've got to have, you know, it comes under the what they call requirements for urban buses, basically.
That's if you were getting the 51% subsidy.
That's if you're getting the 51% subsidy.
If you didn't have that and say council did it all themselves, then they wouldn't need to do that.
Potentially you wouldn't need to do that, but then you've got the issue of, you know, are you being inclusive? You know,
Another conversation.
yeah, it's a sort of separate but related conversation.
Yeah, no, that's great. Just the total mobility service, so I'm just querying the numbers. It's 13,100 trips a year, which is a lot. And it's about 35 trips per day if we went every day, averaged over the whole year, even Christmas Day. And I know the rate that's collected is only about $20,000, $25,000. You put that $25,000 of those trips, it's not much per trip. It doesn't, the dollars going into the number of trips doesn't add up. Am I getting something wrong?
60% of the value of the trip is subsidised by ECAN and central government, but they're still paying basically a taxi fare, so that's quite a high rate, if you like. So it's not arguably a necessarily $2 to get them from Tynwald to wherever they're going in Ashburton. It might be 10 or 15, of which $10 would be paid. So it was $15. $10 would be paid between ECAN and central government, and the others paid $5 by the user.
So you're confident the numbers are right?
I'm fairly confident the numbers are right because we have a lady who spends her life dealing with this sort of thing. So yeah,
No, that's good. Thank you.
Richard.
Again, it's on the total mobility. Just to be eligible for that, you know, I think you said we had 641 people in Ashburton District that are eligible for it. Are they? Is that what perhaps Councillor Todd was talking about? Are we, you know, fully saturated with people that can get that thing, or because that's pretty critical because it's, you know, that's almost, you know, we had of the survey people, how many had total mobility cards, because that's quite a critical thing to understand.
The critical thing to understand there is potentially that total mobility it's about your disability has to be mobility related. So, you know, if you can't drive a car, then you know, all day, every day sort of thing. If you can't drive, then you'll get a total mobility card. Arguably, if you can get around and you can drive, then you shouldn't necessarily have a total mobility card. But there will be times where, with certain disabilities, where you're not able to drive for, you know, 1 day in a fortnight, 2 days in a fortnight, whatever. You know, so you still get the card. So you still have the ability to actually get out and go to your hospital appointment or go to your health appointment on Wednesday if you're having a particular, you know, a bad day, if you like, you know, health wise. So, you know, I think we've got the numbers of people that need total mobility cards covered, because to get a total mobility card you have to get a reference from a health professional basically, and it has to say you qualify for this card. So that assessment process is done separate to ECAN. It's done by the GPs and the support agencies for people with disabilities.
I'm interested to understand how, because I looked up in the total mobility budget, is it 10 million, is it? Is that what it, how big a budget is the whole ECAN budget on that thing?
Oh, the ECAN budget's quite
And we're getting,
extensive,
I think we're 59,000, I think was the rate. But some of that is actually funded out of general rates, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah.
So don't think that we're not funding it. We're funding it through
Yeah,
general rates.
yeah.
So we do actually, so I think it'd be great to understand what the whole pool that the Ashburton District gets with that. Then they can understand what we're actually spending, rather than just saying we're spending $1.35 on.
Yeah, and that,
18,000.
and again, that's sort of, if you like, ring fence to the total mobility thing. So what you'd be needing to do with this is add extra on top of that.
Yeah, but at the moment it's funded through a targeted rate and
Yeah.
it's funded through a general rate, so it's
Yeah.
actually funded. It's big. It's not just 59,000. It's a much bigger bill than that the district is actually putting into it. Yeah, that was all I had.
Thanks, Richard. Carolyn?
Thank you. Thanks for the presentation. I've read the survey a few times, and it's great. Thank you. It's very thorough, and it's good reading, actually. I have some questions. One is, and Tony alluded to it, the service clubs are relied on extensively for travel, just, hospice, day to day, and Rotary and Lions, whatever. And they're getting older. So, did you do any forecasting in this survey? Did you come to a conclusion about 10 years from now or 5 years from now?
I didn't, but you're on the money, and that's I think that all that support that you're talking about, that people are providing, taking, getting older people around the town, I think that reflects in the finding that we got, where older people weren't identifying transport challenges as a huge thing right now, because I think there's heaps of carpooling that goes on to get people to the myriad of clubs and organisations that gather in this community, and over time that is going to get more challenging. But we didn't drill into that, but it's important to think about, and that's where I'm looking at the fact that this is you've got an ageing demographic in this community. We have across the whole country, but Ashburton especially so. And thinking about, by the time the next census comes around, I think we're going to be tracking close to 10% of the population aged 75 and over, and probably still a pretty reasonable proportion of the population in that 80 plus age group. And these issues are going to become more and more. I bet a lot of those people don't currently have a total mobility card because they see no purpose for it, because their friends take them to bowls or whatever they go to. They carpool when they're going to volunteer, because these are our volunteers.
They're our Meals on Wheels and
Yeah,
all that sort of thing.
they're all these things.
We're going to
Yeah.
have huge problems with that in the future. And with regards to, there's that aspect, but that's all. And your research you did on social isolation, of course, that's all going to come to a head. So we're going to have no volunteers. Social isolation will be a sequelae to that, and then we'll have ongoing problems. My next question is about the ECAN thing. I would like to know the total amount of money paid to our taxi services or whatever for the total mobility card. I think that's essential for us to think about it. And I personally think that this research is not done to protect the taxi company, which is what you've alluded to. It is done to see the needs of our community and what we need with regards to public transportation. And I also think we need to keep that in mind. Like the total mobility people will always have, if they're doing that many driving units, they're always going to have a service because it's obviously commercially very viable. So I think we just need to be clear about why we did this research, not is to see what our community wants, not to protect a private business.
Well,
Yeah, and because we don't protect any other private businesses.
right, look, I don't have the exact figures for you in terms of how much we pay to Ashburton taxis. I don't know whether I'd want to release that in terms of.
No, absolutely. I'm not asking you for
Yeah,
that,
no,
but I
yeah.
think
But-
we don't know what our rates are. It's very cloudy. We just don't even need that actual figure, but we need a ballpark.
But I also agree
Yeah.
with you that this is a good starting point. The survey
Yeah.
and is a good starting point to have the discussion, and it provides a lot of good information that you can use to progress. As if you're looking to advance this and to progress it through, there's a process issue, a number of steps that you have to follow to introduce a new service. So, you know, this provides some good background to it. So
Yeah, and we
very good.
just developed our long-term plan, so this is, and that goes out to 10 years. And in 10 years, our view of Ashburton will be totally different. So we need to consider all those factors, not just what we're looking at, you know, so thank you.
Phil?
Thank you. So Total Mobility is operated solely by Ashburton Taxis, is that right? Yep. When you were doing the, this page has some of it, people were saying that Ashburton Taxis are doing a brilliant job. Did you have a percentage of Total Mobility card holders and what they thought of Ashburton Taxi Service compared to non-card holders?
No, we didn't.
But that's in the ECAN report. I mean,
In
it
the
comes
ECAN
up,
report, yeah. I know in Christchurch, like I do research on a lot of different topics, but quite a lot in the disability space. And I know that that there is a feeling that the surveys don't provide the whole, like obviously they hear from the people who respond to a survey. They don't necessarily hear from all total mobility users, and there is a lot of frustration around that. There was a review underway nationally for total mobility. It looks like I put an official information act request in to try and find out where it was at actually, and I didn't get any useful response even through that question. But they were, prior to the election, it was under review. I don't know where things are at, but yeah. We didn't hear from total mobility users specifically. Some of them have responded to the survey, a good number, and like I said, we had 24% of the people who filled in the survey identified as having a disability, and a lot of them were people who use total mobility services with Ashburton Taxis. The survey, the ECAN survey shows that they're satisfied with it. Our survey shows that yes, they're satisfied with it, but they have to, it's hard. You can't get a wheelchair taxi. Oh, I'd love to go to dinner with my friend. Yeah. She's invited me. I'll book a taxi. It doesn't work like that. There's just, you can't be spontaneous and rely on the taxi in Ashburton. Just like you can't go out, drink too much and then go, oh, I'll get a taxi home, because chances are you won't be able to secure a taxi or you'll wait a long time for it. So it's awesome that Ashburton has a taxi service, but it's very limited, and that impacts on total mobility users just the same as it does on people who had too many wines.
Lane?
Thank you. I've got problems with this. Public transport for all. It doesn't work. On a Friday, I'm working at hospice or helping. The first thing I'm doing is picking a couple of guys up. And certainly they need help, and they certainly won't come in with public transport. They can't. You said it before, wheelchairs. You can't get it in a bus. So why do we call it for all? Because you can't do it. You've got different organizations picking certain people up. Yes, you might have a bus service what picks up, and this is a really awful way to say, normal people, because all the other ones can't use it. How do I see this the wrong way, or how do I see this?
Well, a bus, like I see a bus, and obviously I live in Otautahi, I don't live in Ashburton. Buses are used by a broad spectrum of people in Ashburton and in Christchurch, and they do meet the needs of wheelchair users, people with a wide range of mobility issues. They still don't, it doesn't meet all that demand, but they do cover the needs of lots of different people. Sharon called a bus to my place. She came from Shirley to Hallswell this morning to come down here. So buses buses do meet the needs of lots of different people, because they've got one car, and this way her husband could get the kids to school.
I understand that, but I mean, not all people
Oh, we
can use
understand
it.
that.
No, no,
And
and
even-
imagine how many buses you'd need for everybody
Yes.
to not use
Yeah.
their car in Ashburton.
And if you've got a 40-seater bus and you've got someone with a wheelchair,
Yeah.
as the driver, I have to get out, try to get the person in. It doesn't work. There's other people sitting behind me.
Our network in Christchurch,
Okay.
that basically has wheelchair spaces on each of the buses,
I
and
can
they're
understand that.
dedicated, and that's in the requirements for urban buses. But we also acknowledge that even though that is provided, there are still people out in the community who will not be able to use that, and that is the purpose of the total mobility scheme. It's to cater for those people who cannot use a public bus, and in Ashburton it's used basically as a provider that people who cannot drive. So
So how are we going to do here? If we want to do something for half a year, what are we trying to do?
Well-
Get everyone in,
Yeah.
or get 80% in?
And that's why we have that. There would need to be a use case worked out through a proper business case process, and this is a starter. Your survey's a starter to say, look, the community's pointing to this thing, but what would need to follow would need to be a proper business case. If you were to pursue this and to approach ECAN to say, we need an investigation of a service in Ashburton, ECAN would have to say, well, we need to fund a business case to establish what we're trying to do here, because I can see 4 or 5 different use cases from the survey thing. There was the social use case of getting people to and from places on a Friday night. There's the school kids getting round. There's the people with disabilities and the health issues there. They don't all necessarily mesh all together to provide a one-size-fits-all solution. So, really there needs to be a lot more work done on that aspect. And I can tell you as well that if you're looking to get it subsidised by Waka Kotahi, they will want a proper business case done, and they will want to make sure that business case works before they would even consider putting their 51% in.
One more question, if I can. Now I lost it. We tried it a couple of times over the years. Why did it never go any further? Didn't we do it right, or is it not being used?
Well, I can remember back in the 1990s, late 1990s, early 2000, there was a bus service that ran, and it was commercial.
Yep.
And basically, my understanding is it stopped because people weren't using it.
Yep.
And that's the evolution. Everybody has access to a car now, or 95% of people have access to a car. So you're dealing with that balance.
Yeah.
It doesn't always work, and that's the trouble with cars. They don't always work for everyone, and not everybody can use them. But it's how you deal with that, and how you try and make your service attractive to getting enough people on it so it is actually usable, and that comes down to the use case. And as I say, there's four or five different ones there. If you've got a bus running around in the morning taking people to shopping, and they only need it for morning and afternoon shopping, you're not going to be taking the people to the pub, to and from the pub at night. If you're doing all those things, your costs are going to go up.
Yeah.
So, just
Thank you.
Also, I just wanted to say that the My Way trial, I know that My Way is really expensive, and that it's going to cost a lot to ratepayers, but it was really well planned, and there was a lot of pre-engagement even before the service started. So they did pop-up shops in different places. They tried to introduce the concept to people. They tried to get people to figure out how do you book the service, and if you don't have access to technology, what can you do instead? So there was a lot of pre-engagement for it to be successful, and then it also took time. It wasn't just a 6-month trial. It was 12 months before they saw a significant increase in usage, and they also saw there was a shift in the way people were using public transport. People who were dependent on cars to get around to work, etc., were now using MyWay. So that meant less congestion on the roads, and there was so just be open to the fact that even people who were dependent on cars could possibly be would use the service, would use a public transport service if it was well thought of, planned out, advertised, and made attractive to them. Then they could opt over time. They would probably opt to use the public transport. They think, okay, the bus is available, or this mini bus is available. I can just book it. It's easy to book. I don't have the car today. I can use it. So over time, if they feel that it's easy, it's accessible, then you can have a change of behavior over time. So it's just that investment and having that long-term kind of goal.
Thank you. I was just going to say 1990, Ashburton from the 1990s to what it is now has changed a lot. So I can imagine that we may need that kind of service. But I just had a quick question. If there was a commercial operated, they have to meet all those regulation requirements with the buses?
No, they don't.
They
If
don't.
If they're not getting a subsidy,
No, I realise that,
they
yep.
don't. Yeah.
So if there was a commercial, because I have heard, talking to some of the bus company operators, that there is some kind of appetite to run something, but they were put off by the regulations. So
If they're doing it commercially, all they have to do is register with Environment Canterbury that they're doing it.
yep,
It doesn't because they're not getting a subsidy. They don't necessarily have to meet the requirements for urban buses and such like.
they wouldn't get the subsidy from ECAN or NZTA, but they wouldn't also have to, pardon? They could from council. Okay. Richard, question?
You mentioned before, there is a review of the total mobility, and it's been 5th of September 2024. They're refocusing the terms of reference, and they've set that up, so we should be looking into that going forward. And the other one was that I'd just implore that, I'm interested that you talked about how it's funded with ECAN. So do you mean when it's funded with ECAN, it's all a targeted rate if we decide to do something, or is it funded out of general rate like your finance policy says? Because a general rate's just a subsidy from one part to another sort of thing.
When we do fixed route in my way in Timaru, it's 90-something% is targeted rate. So you're looking at, I think our budget of, off the top of my head, there was something like $59 million of rating across the whole of Canterbury to pay for public transport services in Canterbury. Of that, it's over 50 million is paid for from targeted rates. The other 8 million pays for a lot of the overheads, basically that are involved. So the money that your targeted rate collects goes to pay for the actual service itself. So you're paying for, here's that bus that goes up and down there is being paid for through your targeted rate. So the contract payment goes.
The rest of it is paid for at the general rate.
Right, and the general rates are only, I think 5 to 10%, and that covers things like your transport planning, your contract admin, and things like that. So
Just interested to know what that number is for Mid Canterbury, because obviously we don't have much, but we contribute to it, so we just understand.
Well, yeah, and in terms of it, it's a general rate, but it's a general rate that applies across the whole of Canterbury.
Maybe we could get that information.
Yeah, it'll be in our long-term plan. This year, which came out just a few months ago. There's a actual diagram that has the whole rating and grant and user pays element included there. I can email it down if you.
That would be good. Thank you. Neil?
Yeah, I probably like the idea of a business case being developed as first step. And after the survey, I'm just trying to think of the people who are would be requiring a service, if I've got it right, but correct me if I haven't, is they're generally low income people who are wanting a service. If you've got a higher income, you've generally got your own car. And if you've got high income but elderly and have no car because you're not allowed one, then you could afford to pay for a taxi anyway without any subsidy. So you've narrowed it down to the people who are lower income. We need to perhaps provide a service for them. And I'm thinking if we had they would most likely have a community services card, which they use for other things as well. So we don't want to get rid of the taxis. We don't, not get rid of is not the right word. We don't want to compete with the taxis that are here. We want that service. So if we expanded that service with that company or another, and a business case would work this out, then someone on a community service who has a community services card could access a taxi but pay a lower rate because someone else is topping it up. So that keeps your taxi service going. It looks after the people who can't afford the full fare, so it would help everyone because you'll have more taxis as well. And for people who can afford to pay for it, they use the taxi service as it is. It would benefit them as well because there'd be more of them. If I'm getting this all in sequence, your thoughts?
I think we also heard from a not insignificant group of people who want to be able to access public transport because they want to reduce their carbon emissions, so they want to access alternatives to driving a private motor vehicle. So that's part of the equation too, and they'll go across income levels. One thing I do remember at the workshop, the taxi company people that were there talking about difficulty recruiting drivers to expand their service, and I think this was in response to people talking about how tricky it is to get a taxi at night. So that's the other part of the equation, is that it's not necessarily easily scalable. You can't just put extra taxis on the road without finding the people who are able and qualified to be able to drive them. So that's the other, and people who are prepared to undertake that work locally. So there's a whole employment part of the picture too to think about.
You put a bus on, you've got the same problem.
Same thing, yeah, absolutely, same thing.
I guess with a bus you would have like a predetermined route, whilst with a taxi you've got to consider someone who takes the bookings, and or are you going to get them to book it via an app, or just all of those considerations in terms of cost. You're going to have to pay somebody to sit in an office and take bookings and things. So yeah, for sure they will. Just to keep in mind. Yeah.
So we'll take a couple more questions and then we might just sort of see what our next steps are from here. So Lynette?
Just thinking of affordability, and like we know My Way's struggling down in Timaru, is there a base number of a population that you do need to make any bus service work? And what is the numbers there?
It will vary depending on what the nature of your service is. I mean, in Christchurch, for example, we have services that because Christchurch is so big, there are services that we can provide that are more social services than commercial services. So there's a cross subsidy there. Ashburton, you don't have that advantage of size. I get the feeling it'll be very difficult to start from scratch. We were talking about My Way in Timaru before, and My Way has replaced a public transport service in Timaru that existed for 70 odd, probably more than that years, and that was run using fixed route and scheduled services. My Way is now the on-demand service in Timaru, there was already a base demand there. Knowing what that is in a place like Ashburton will be difficult to understand, and that is why we would say that we would have to do a business case. We would have to prove that the money being spent is is value for money.
Yeah, it's just been alluded to, there's a new bus service in town, busy advertising, a couple of vans sitting there, like advertising shopping trips to Christchurch, whatever. Well, I wonder if their information, how they're going, will feed into this to give us some idea. Is it viable? How are they doing in as well?
Who are they? I don't know.
You see them, they've been sitting at Mitre 10, there's been just trips, but still another service starting. Also, the Y have just put out results. They've done a big survey on Ashburton youth, and I'm just wondering whether you had looked at their results that came out last week. Whether anything there to do with transport.
I haven't looked at it just because we'd finished this quite a long time ago, but I'd heard of that because I think it also covers because they cover mid and South Canterbury as well, don't they? I
Yes,
heard
they
about
do.
it in relation to Mackenzie District. I'll have to have a look now that it's out.
Yeah, no, they do that survey every year as well, and that's just on the youth. But you're right, it's from Ashburton right down to the Waitaki. Tony.
Thank you. So if council decide to suck and see, we're going to do it, and we do it for a trial period, what's the optimum? What is the trial period? Is it 1 year, 2 years? Like, how long do you take to say we're going to continue with this, or we're going to scrap it?
When we've done trials in the past, it's generally been, it's a minimum of a year, but 2 years is preferable because that gives you time for people to change behaviour. You imagine if you currently have a car, you're going to still use the car. If you know it's only for a year, if it's 2 years, you might go, well, actually, I may not replace the car. I'll give this a go and see how it works. So we like our trials to be as long. And to be fair, a trial is the best way to do any market research because that's real live. That's people putting their their own money where their mouth is to a greater extent.
Carolyn, last question.
Just a really quick question to Councillor Lovett. I never knew there was a second public transport outfit in town. Who is providing it?
I don't know if there is.
So that's an incorrect comment?
There's a minibus sitting.
It's a rental. We'll find out some more details and figure it out. Richard, you've got your light on.
I'd really like to understand the budget thing because I just worked out we're 5.3% of the total rating units of ECAN. Therefore, you would hope we get 5.3% of the total mobility budget if we're paying for it. It's 10 million going to 11 million. So I'd just like to understand, if we're missing out as a district because we don't have public transport, because people think since we haven't got public transport, there's no point in having a total mobility card. So that's something we need to probably understand quite strongly because if you're in Christchurch, if you can go on a bus and use it, well, that's a great thing because you're getting a subsidy. But in Ashburton, there's no bus. Many people might think, well, that card's useless. So we just need to understand that.
The total mobility card in Ashburton's paying for the taxi service. It's whether and if you're looking at that number of trips per year,
I'm just I've written a few notes here. And I just wanted to give you just a bit of an overview of our Mid-Canterbury Connector, so our community vehicle trust. So we average probably about 30 passengers a month. So that's coming from mainly Methven or Rakai, sometimes Mount Somers, Mayfield Way into Ashburton. We have 12 volunteer drivers at the moment, which is good. And we have one paid admin person, so someone who does the roster, checks the car over, etc. So we receive funding from ECAN and NZTA of just over $10,000 per annum. The rest we apply for grant funding, and we have some money obviously coming in for fares. So to give you an idea, it's $15 for someone to come catch the vehicle from Methven into Ashburton. They'll do their jobs and then drive home. There's no limit on time. It just has to be between the 9 and 4:30 time periods. So someone could be picked up in Methven at 9:30 in the morning and return at, say, 2 o'clock. Most of the passengers are either elderly, don't have a driver's license anymore, or they have those sort of disabilities where they're unable to drive. We have our regulars, so we'll have a couple of people who pretty much get that that car booked in every 2 weeks to come to Ashburton, and that is their social interaction, pretty much. They're getting their jobs done and doing their shopping and everything, but it is their way of sort of socially interacting. Thinking about your surveys, Sarah and Sharon, and what you've sort of talked about, it seems to me we've got sort of 4 different things we need to look at. Personally, I think we need to look in how we get an Uber service here, because we've got those people who want to get home at night. There's not enough taxis. They don't want to drink and drive. We know when we read the court news that there's a hell of a lot of people who are drinking and driving. Maybe Uber is the answer in that case. E-scooters for our youth, maybe that's something that we look at. It could be e-bikes or e-scooters. I don't know how well that trial would go, because I think we still have a big elderly population who wouldn't use it, and they wouldn't like the e-scooters on our footpaths. Total mobility, we've got to keep that as it is, and have the taxis support that. But I'm also thinking, could our community vehicle trust, which is why I sort of talked about it before, do the around town minivan sort of route that people are asking for, and so it kind of fits into that, and is another. I just don't know if we needed another 4 vehicles, how we would get those volunteer drivers, but that's kind of set up at the moment. So that was just my observation. There was an indication from a commercial user of doing something, and yes, we talked about in the 1990s it didn't work because they didn't have the passengers, but town has definitely changed, so maybe it could work. Where to from here? Mark, do you want to take the microphone and sort of give us your view? Put you in the hot seat for a minute.
Don't have too many strong views. I was just wanting guidance from what you really want. If you were to write a business case, then we'll write a business case for what we want to do, and I'll work with Len to do that. But haven't got strong views either way. I mean, lots of discussion, and I've had personal experience with a lot of that stuff in terms of community groups. Getting my parents use them a lot, getting from Leeston to Christchurch. Hospital visits, things. But that's not what we're talking about here. It's about, and it seems to me that it's mainly a social service that we're providing for getting. It's not for general youths getting around. As a regular user of footpaths and biking around Ashburton, it's not actually that hard to get around. And a 35-minute walk is from here to home. It's actually not hard to do, but not everyone's actually able to do that. So have to, as we've talked about before, have to cater for everybody, and it's the ones that have got the needs that can't walk or cycle or drive. And get a park close to where they want to go. They need to have someone to drive them there. And I like the community vehicle trust. I like that. And it's getting volunteers. The question about volunteers and ageing, the population is always ageing, but there's always new volunteers come along, just like there's new staff come along and new councillors come along. You don't just, people don't stop volunteering just because they're young now and getting older. They don't stop volunteering. But the volunteering, the driving that my parents had used was actually people the same age as them that were driving them. And so that's the next group to come around, and I'm getting closer to that myself. So, yeah, be able to get on, that's the next stage. So, if you write a business case, guided by you what you want to do, really, but it is in conjunction with ECAN on where we want to go with it and how we're going to fund it, and whether it comes out of rates or it's totally funded by council or we get subsidy for it. That's the decision that needs to be made. So.
Thank you. Len, you wanted to comment?
Yeah, our position would be obviously that perhaps the first point of call would be that council, the annual plan process is kicking off early next year, and that's an opportunity if Ashburton Council wants to approach ECAN and say, we think a business case should be considered for a service and provided for in the annual plan for ECAN, then that would be the way to pursue it. Obviously, we're constrained in how much resource we have to put into that business case, so we may have to fund that through rating or whatever. So there's potential there that it may be funded through a rate on Ashburton Borough, for want of a better term. But that essentially is the process, is that we would really need to do a business case first, and we'd need to make sure that business case is funded in our next annual plan.
Thank you. Phil?
Thank you. I might be missing the bus here, excuse the pun, but the biggest issue by far was traffic congestion, 70%, and I don't think that a bus service is going to change that any. As alluded to, the bridge. Right. Okay. So the second bridge is going to sort that out. Only 13% had an issue with the cost of a taxi. As Liz alluded to, if we encouraged Uber, if we can do that into town, that would ease some of those issues. And also the scooters. I think possibly that 13% might be younger who are worried about the cost of taxis, so they can hop on their scooter. I'm not sure that we need a business case at all, the cost of that. I think we're not thinking about 10 years' time when there's more older people. I think we're thinking about right now and what we need right now. And Uber and e-scooter trial, no cost to us.
Thanks, Phil. Neil?
Yeah, I think we do need a business case, and perhaps Mark, you could write it. I don't think ECAN needs to be involved in writing a business case for us here, unless you wanted to be. And if we did, we're going to lose another year if you're going to run it through your annual plan. What I'd like to see is probably Mark and his team develop a business case for Ashburton Solution, and it goes into your annual plan if it stacks up, and it may stack up that we just fund it ourselves if it's not a huge amount for solving the problem that we have. But I think Mark would do the initial stages to see, I think, what it would actually require for Ashburton. I think we've got really good information from the survey. We just need to
How much would be involved in the business case, putting it together?
How much what?
How much would be involved in putting together a business case? Time and money.
Well, do you want to? It depends what you want to achieve.
Ben?
In terms of what we put bids in for business cases, processes for service improvements in Greater Christchurch to the National Land Transport Plan process, and they were in terms of $100,000 that we were sort of looking at. NZTA or central government have not funded those business cases even in Christchurch for their 50% of it. So we're looking at having to pay that sort of level of financing just to get our business cases through, a single stage business case through. So that's the ballpark that we would be looking at if we funded it.
Yeah, so I think we're better to do it here in Ashburton than send it there and let the whole bureaucratic process slow everything down and achieve nothing. We're better to run a business case out of your team, I'd think, Neil, and get the thing moving. The business case will decide whether it's viable or not.
So could we ask for a report to come to council on a business case? Is that what you?
Yeah, I think what we can do is prepare a report, just giving you a bit of an idea of what that would look like and what it could look like for us, for you to consider.
Sarah?
Just chipping in here, we tried really hard to get a really good gauge of how viable this would work, and I think if you frame that as a business case, you're still not going to be that much ahead of where we've got to and finding out if this is going to work or not. If you've got a commercial operator who's got a bit of an appetite for trying a bus, then if I was you, I'd be trying to partner with them to get them to try it, user pays, and from that you'll start to get a bit of an idea of is this a goer or not. And if it does start to get traction, then you're going to be in a good position to go back to Waka Kotahi to look at how can we scale this up to something that's more inclusive and that does get some sort of subsidy. But I think you're just going to end up going around in circles, getting back to where we've got at the moment, unless you can actually try something on the ground with wheels. And it might be that it doesn't work, but I think there are people who do have an appetite to use this. And yeah, if you've got a commercial operator, then that seems like that's a good way to head. And the Uber thing. And the other thing is that I can't remember the ins and outs of it, but I know that there's something around the funding of that community connector, that van, that means it can't do pickups within the town because of total mobility operating. But if there can be some flex, that means that they can pick up people once they pass the borders of Ashburton Township, then that also is going to meet a lot of this need. It seems stupid that it drives straight past somebody who would have used it and paid to use it, but they're not allowed to because Total Mobility has a contract with the taxis.
It's more a case that there is a taxi service, that a commercial service that's it's less to do with Total Mobility. It's more to do that with the taxi service and the rules.
And we, when we were setting up the service, we kind of made that decision that we didn't want to step on anyone's toes, and we did quite a thorough piece of research ourselves, looking at what other services were available. So the health shuttle, what the Rotary and Lions clubs members do, driving people around. So we didn't kind of overlap, because a lot of the community's vehicle trusts, their main objective is to take people into Christchurch Hospital or take them into Christchurch. So yes, I think that's good advice, Sarah. But yeah, I don't know how we figure that taxi one out. Anyway, Carolyn.
Thanks, Liz. Yeah, Sarah, I think that is good advice, but whether that can be actioned or not. With regards to the Total Mobility Service that's currently operating for the districts, I think times have changed a little bit since then, and our population's got older and we've moved on. I think there's a danger that we preempt the results, and I think that is coming from ECAN with regards to preserving the current taxi business, that's not our call, really. And I think there is a need somewhere, and we need to delineate that clearly. So we need a business case to ascertain what that need is. And if we can do a business case for minimal dollars, I think we have a responsibility to the community to do that, because we've done the survey, we've got the results. We need to push that out and see where that ends up. And to say we have to protect the taxis, well, we don't know that, because we don't know, we're putting an expectation on what they need to earn or what they don't need to earn. We don't know what the usage is. All those things, I think, are preempting the business case, and we should go in with an open mind and do a very, a business case to ascertain the genuine need or not. I don't know.
Thanks, Carolyn. Richard?
I support a business case, but I just want to understand if it's rural, urban, or it's, where it's targeting. Because to say public transport in Ashburton District is too wide a scope.
That's Ashburton Township. That's all
so
we're
it doesn't
talking
include
about.
Methven?
No, so we've already got that service happening.
And part of that, it would be great to understand the total cost of the total mobility, because we just think it's a little bit of money, but this ECAN's putting a lot in, and Wakatahi's put a lot of money in. So it'd be good to understand how much money is actually going into the district from that thing, because people think there's no money in Mid-Canterbury public transport, but there could be quite a substantial sum being spent anyway.
Yep. No, that's good. Russell?
Thank you. Before we did a business case, we have to be totally clear about what we actually want and what service we want. The business case for a My Way is totally different to a business case for the type of service you were talking about, where we partner with a local bus company and maybe council aside some signage and some space for those buses to park. Totally different things. Where I'm stressing a bit, we've just done our LTP. We've had a rather large rate increase this year. We've got one next year already on the cards. You know, our rates double in the next 10 years with what we've already got in the pipeline. We know in 3 years' time there'll be more things to add to that without this. We've got to keep this district affordable to live in before we even have these services. Otherwise, we won't have the people to live here to use them. So I think we have to be really clear about what we're trying to achieve.
Thank you. So is everyone happy? You've kind of skewed it now. Is everyone happy that we have some sort of report come to council about a business case? Yeah, Carolyn's put her hand up. Yeah, everyone happy with that? Some not, but that's okay, because if it comes to council, then we can go through the report and vote yes or no going forward. So I think that's where we've got. I just got a text from Leslie, and she said City Hop is the van hire company associated with Mitre 10, but I don't know any more than that, so we can Google that later. Thank you very much, Sarah, Sharon and Len and Omid down the back there. I see you furiously writing notes, and Mark also, for all that information that you've given us. Really good to have this slideshow. Sarah, have you sent that through to council, so maybe we could get a copy, because we've got the full report, but it's be quite good to have that slideshow as well. Yeah, that was really lots of information, lots of good questions and chat. Thank you for your time. I think we're going to break now for some lunch and back for another workshop at 1. Thank you.
The slideshow.